Hello Dub Nation, it's always a thrill to connect with you, especially as we're about to reveal the latest news that could shape the fate of our beloved Golden State Warriors. But before we dive into this whirlwind of information, let me make a friendly request. Show us some love by clicking the like button to strengthen our bond, and hey, if you are not subscribed yet, join our channel for a thrilling and emotional journey. Don't forget to turn on notifications to stay ahead of the game.
The Warriors are running out of runway as the Jonathan Kuminga saga threatens to turn into a full-blown nightmare. At this point, Golden State is staring at two uncomfortable choices: move Kuminga before his value slips any further, or actually play him enough to rebuild both his reputation and his market. Because the worst-kept secret around the league is no longer a secret at all, the Warriors want to trade Jonathan Kuminga. A tense restricted free agency period didn't produce the outcome Kuminga hoped for, and when he returned, Golden State didn't exactly reward him with a steady role. Now, with another recent stretch of absences from the rotation, echoes of what reportedly created friction between player and organization during the 2024-25 season, the relationship feels closer to the breaking point than the repair stage. If nothing changes, a trade starts to look less like an option and more like the only remaining exit. The real problem: nobody knows what Kuminga is worth right now. That's the harsh reality Golden State has to wrestle with. On paper, Kuminga checks boxes teams dream about: a 23-year-old athlete who can score, get downhill, finish in different ways, rebound at a high level for his position, and even make plays for others with respectable efficiency. But the advantage the Warriors once had, the ability to sell him as a rising, untapped core piece, has been slipping away for a while. And now they may struggle to get the kind of return they once envisioned for their talented but complicated offensive weapon. What makes it even scarier is that it's not only about Golden State's own missteps. The league's trade environment might not cooperate either. ESPN's Tim Bontemps recently relayed a view from an anonymous NBA executive who expects the 2026 trade deadline to be relatively quiet, with many players essentially stuck where they are. All these guys are going to get stuck where they are, the Western Conference executive said about the stretch leading into the February 5th deadline. I don't think it's going to be as active as people think, and I don't think the guys available will be that good. The contract could help, but only if the Warriors act fast. Kuminga is on a 2-year, $46.8 million deal with a team option in the second year, which at least gives Golden State a selling point. A rival executive can take a calculated swing without committing long-term. Still, if the Warriors want to avoid a total value collapse, the next decision has to come quickly. Kuminga becomes trade eligible on January 15th. And that date suddenly feels like a line in the sand. The logical move, if maximizing return is the goal, is to trade him as soon as he's eligible, rather than waiting until the February 5th deadline when the market could be flooded and desperate teams start demanding discounts. In a strange way, Golden State also has a clearer path than most teams. While other front offices are still debating what direction to choose, the Warriors can act with a kind of brutal certainty. They know the situation is trending toward an ending. Waiting makes them weaker. If the Warriors delay, they don't just risk a slower market, they risk looking even more desperate. Near the deadline, they won't be pitching Kuminga as the perfect missing piece. They'll be hoping someone wants him badly enough to ignore the biggest red flag of all: inactivity. Because that's what kills leverage. When a player can't consistently crack the rotation, rival teams stop asking what he could be, and start asking what's wrong, what they're missing, and why the coaching staff won't trust him. The other option: play him and rebuild the story. The alternative is simple but risky: put Kuminga back on the floor, give him real opportunities, and let him remind the league what he is. If he strings together productive stretches, he changes the conversation. Suddenly he's not the guy Steve Kerr won't play. He's a young forward with upside who can help a team right now. There's optimism in the idea that the NBA already knows what Kuminga brings. But the past summer showed that assumptions don't always turn into real offers. And it's fair for rival executives to wonder why they should give up meaningful assets for a player who, in practice, has spent the last 2 years hovering in place instead of taking a clear leap. The clock is loud now. With only days left until he's trade eligible, the Warriors can't keep straddling the fence. They either move Kuminga as soon as January 15th arrives, before the market tightens and the leverage fades, or they commit to playing him enough to protect his value until they're ready to deal. Because if Golden State does neither, this doesn't just stay a saga. It becomes the kind of mistake teams regret for years. And here's the part that makes this more than just a young player wants a bigger role storyline. The Warriors aren't simply deciding what Kuminga is worth, they're deciding what their season is worth. Because every day this drags on creates a ripple effect in 3 directions at once. The locker room starts feeling the tension of an unresolved situation. Steve Kerr's rotations get tighter, not looser, especially in close games. The front office loses flexibility, because other teams can sense when a decision is being forced. The rotation problem becomes a credibility problem. When a former top 10 pick repeatedly can't hold a consistent spot in the rotation, rival executives don't evaluate him the way fans do. They don't see untapped upside. They see uncertainty. They ask questions like, if he's as talented as advertised, why isn't he closing games? Is it defense, decision-making, effort, fit, or something deeper? If the Warriors, a team desperate for reliable two-way athleticism, won't fully commit to him, why should we pay a premium? That's how value erodes quietly. Not through a bad box score, but through the story the league tells itself. The Warriors are also trapped by their own urgency. Golden State isn't operating with the patience of a rebuilding team. Their margin is thinner because they're trying to win now, and that changes everything. When you're chasing seeding, you don't develop players the same way. You prioritize what you trust, and Kerr has historically leaned toward veterans, defensive reliability, and low-mistake basketball in high-leverage minutes. That reality makes it harder for Kuminga to play through normal growing pains, which then makes it harder for the Warriors to showcase him, which then makes it harder to trade him for real value. It's a loop. And the longer it runs, the more it benefits everyone except Golden State. January 15th isn't just a date, it's an inflection point. Once Kuminga becomes trade eligible, the Warriors have to pick a lane fast, because the league calendar doesn't wait for comfort. If Golden State shops him immediately, they might beat the deadline rush and find a team willing to gamble on talent before the market gets crowded. But doing it that early also sends a loud signal: we've made up our minds. And once other teams know you have to move a player, they start negotiating like it. On the other hand, if they keep him and play him more, they're making a bet that he'll produce enough to raise his price, without disrupting roles, chemistry, and the nightly push to win. That's a delicate bet for any team, and an even tougher one for a team that can't afford long losing streaks. The stakes are bigger than Kuminga. This decision shapes what the Warriors can realistically become in the second half of the season. If they trade him for win-now help, it's an admission that development time is over. They're trying to stabilize the present. If they trade him for future assets, it raises uncomfortable questions about direction and timeline. If they hold him and he continues to sit, it becomes a visible example of wasted value, the kind of mistake that follows a front office for years. And around the league, teams will be watching closely not only because Kuminga is talented, but because his situation is informative. It tells other players and agents what Golden State does when negotiations get tense, and it tells other front offices how desperate the Warriors might be as the deadline approaches. What happens next will define the narrative. The next few weeks are where reputations get written. If Kuminga gets real minutes and responds, defending, cutting with purpose, finishing strong, making quick reads, the conversation flips. Suddenly he becomes a living highlight reel of upside again, and the Warriors can negotiate from something closer to strength. But if the rotation stays inconsistent, the offers will reflect it. Not because teams don't like Kuminga's talent, but because they'll feel protected making low-risk bids for a player who appears to have limited leverage and a team that looks motivated to move him. That's the nightmare scenario, not losing Kuminga, but losing him for far less than his talent should command. Because once the deadline pressure hits, the league doesn't pay for what a player might become. It pays for what it believes a team is forced to do. The Warriors are dealing with a new and painful wrinkle involving Draymond Green at the worst possible time, especially with fresh criticism of his recent play fueling constant debate. Over the past month, Green's on-court impact has been dissected so heavily that some have even wondered whether Golden State should be willing to include a franchise legend in a trade before the February 5th deadline. ESPN's Anthony Slater noted on Monday that Green is working to reclaim the game-changing influence he's known for. The problem is simple: it's hard to be Draymond if your body won't cooperate. Draymond's health is becoming the real question mark. Green was solid against the LA Clippers at the Intuit Dome on Monday night, but he may have paid a steep price physically after a string of heavy collisions, including an ankle twist that could linger. "I'm banged up," Green admitted. "I hit the bench and cracked a rib, then I rolled my ankle and came down on my wrist. It was just one thing after another during the game." Even with the pain, he found ways to impact the game. Green missed all 6 of his three-point attempts, but he still posted 5 rebounds, 2 steals, and a stunning 12 assists in 32 minutes. Just as important, those 12 assists came with only 1 turnover. And in a brutal 103-102 loss, he finished with Golden State's best plus-minus at +15, a sign that, even on an off-shooting night, the Warriors were better when he was on the floor. That performance followed last week's near triple-double, 10 points, 8 rebounds, 12 assists, giving the Warriors some hope that Green is trending upward after December ended with him owning the team's worst overall plus-minus, -50. Why this matters so much right now? Golden State can't afford for that progress to get derailed by injuries, especially because so much of Green's defensive value is tied to physicality, battling bigger centers, switching, taking contact, and setting a tone that doesn't show up neatly in the box score. But there's another layer here, and it's uncomfortable. Green also can't afford to miss time. If he's out and the Warriors lose, their season slips further into the mud. If he's out and they keep winning, something that's happened in recent weeks, the noise only gets louder about how essential he really is at this stage of his career. It's a tough spot for any veteran. Your team needs you, your body is sending warnings, and every game becomes a referendum. For Green and the Warriors, the hope is pretty straightforward, that his body holds up long enough for him to keep being the two-way difference maker he's been for so many years. That's where the ripple effects start to spread beyond one game, one ankle twist, or one bruised rib. For Steve Kerr and the coaching staff, the next stretch becomes a balancing act that has no clean answer. If Green plays through it, the risk is obvious. One awkward landing or one extra collision can turn a banged-up night into weeks on the sideline. If he sits, Golden State has to patch together the heart of its defense and its half-court organization without the player who often serves as both the anchor and the conductor. And the timing couldn't be more unforgiving. With the February 5th trade deadline looming, every performance, and every absence, becomes part of the league-wide conversation. Rival front offices watch closely. So do the Warriors themselves. When a team is trying to decide whether to hold, tweak around the edges, or make a bigger move, the evaluation happens in real time. How sustainable is this roster? How reliable is its core? How much can you count on your veteran pillars to carry a full season? Green's situation puts a spotlight on an uncomfortable truth. His value isn't just what he produces, it's what he enables. When he's right, Golden State can play faster, defend with more swagger, and create cleaner looks because the ball moves with purpose. When he's limited, even slightly, the margin shrinks. The Warriors can survive cold shooting nights if the defense travels and the turnovers stay under control. But when the defense slips and the offense stalls, close losses start to pile up, and close losses are poison in a Western Conference where the middle of the standings can change in a single week. There's also the on-court chess match that injuries quietly influence. If Green's mobility is compromised, opponents attack it. They force him into more space, make him switch more often, test his lateral movement, and see if he can still recover at the rim. That affects matchups, rotations, and the level of physical pressure Golden State can apply. It also impacts the Warriors' preferred lineups, especially the smaller, more versatile units that rely on Green to cover for size disadvantages and clean up mistakes. Offensively, the consequences are subtler but just as real. Green isn't being judged by three-point percentage, he's being judged by whether he can keep the offense connected. When he's healthy and decisive, he's a trigger for movement, handoffs, quick reads, and passes that hit shooters in rhythm instead of late. When he's hurting, the pace can slow by a half-second, and at the NBA level, that half-second is the difference between an open look and a contested one. If defenses don't respect him as a scoring threat, the floor shrinks. That puts more stress on Golden State's other creators to generate advantages without the usual space. The locker room dynamics matter too. Green is a tone setter, and his presence carries weight in ways that don't show up in a stat sheet. If he's forced into a reduced role or a stop-and-start rhythm because of health, it tests the team's identity. The Warriors have to decide night to night who they are, a team that leans into defense and physicality, or a team that tries to win with finesse and shooting variance. The answer can't change every other game, not if they're trying to build momentum. This is why the Clippers game, despite the loss, still left a complicated message. The missed threes and the visible pain raised concern, but the 12 assists with just one turnover and the team best plus-minus reinforced the same old reality. Even when he's imperfect, Green can tilt games through decision-making, defense, and competitiveness. Now the next few updates, whether he practices fully, whether the ankle responds, whether the rib and wrist soreness calms down, will shape more than the next matchup. They shape the Warriors' short-term strategy and their deadline posture. If Green looks physically stable, it strengthens the case for adding complementary help around the edges rather than touching the core. If he looks like a player who might struggle to stay on the floor, it forces harder conversations about minutes, workload, and whether the team needs a different kind of support to survive the grind. And that's the pressure point. Golden State doesn't just need Draymond Green to play. They need him to be himself, durable enough to set the tone defensively, sharp enough to run the offense, and available enough that the team isn't constantly redefining its identity on the fly. In a season where every win feels expensive, the Warriors can't afford for their most important connective piece to become a nightly question mark. A draft expert can't bring himself to rule the Warriors out as true title contenders for one painfully obvious reason. You're almost forced to assume they'll fix this roster. Golden State has looked sharper offensively lately, yet they're still stuck in a familiar place, sitting in play-in territory. At 19-18, the Warriors are 8th in a brutal Western Conference, and for a lot of people, that's enough to dismiss them from the championship conversation right now. Their veteran stars have missed meaningful time, and the supporting cast hasn't consistently delivered at the level this team needs. But draft analyst Sam Vecenie isn't ready to close the book. On the latest episode of his Game Theory podcast, Vecenie argued that the Warriors have to remain in the title mix for one simple reason. The trade deadline is approaching, and Golden State is one of the few teams you can realistically expect to look different when it's over. They'll probably add a big or another scorer in the front court, which would give them a little more offensive firepower. I just wonder if they can get there, because we know they're the team that's going to have a different face, Vecenie said. That belief isn't coming out of nowhere. Last season, Golden State revived its outlook at the deadline by adding Jimmy Butler, and it changed everything about how seriously people viewed them. The question now is whether they can pull off that kind of pivot again. The deadline is shaping up as the Warriors' defining moment. In 2024-25, the Warriors went from a .500 level team to a legitimate postseason threat after the Butler deal. During the stretch he played, they posted the best defense in the league and a top 10 offense. Even though they ultimately landed in the play-in, the addition of a second aggressive scoring option completely altered what they were capable of night to night. This year, Golden State has a potential tool to swing another major move: Jonathan Kuminga's 2-year, $47 million contract. If the front office is serious about changing the trajectory of this season, that's the kind of salary that can help make a real, meaningful trade possible. And ironically, the Warriors' needs haven't changed much. They either need a true rim-protecting center who can also space the floor, a big who can impact both ends, or they need another interior scorer who can take pressure off Stephen Curry and Butler when defenses load up. So far, names like Anthony Davis and Michael Porter Jr. have been linked to them. But with the deadline still about a month away, the most important part is what we don't know yet. The market always shifts, and unexpected options always appear as teams choose between chasing the playoffs and pivoting toward the future. Why people won't count them out. The urgency is obvious. Curry isn't getting younger, and the organization's responsibility is straightforward. Give him a roster that can actually fight for a championship while he still can. The Warriors have the contracts and the flexibility to make a move, and their recent history suggests they're willing to do it. That's why Vecenie's point lands so hard. You can critique their current flaws. You can question whether they're good enough right now. But as long as the trade deadline hasn't passed, it's difficult to dismiss Golden State completely, because they're one of the few teams with both the motivation and the means to change the entire story in a single deal. But that same expectation cuts both ways, because if everyone assumes the Warriors will make a move, the pressure on the front office becomes relentless. And once a team is viewed as the one that has to do something, other executives don't negotiate with sympathy. They negotiate with leverage. That's the hidden consequence of Vecenie's point. Golden State's reputation as a deadline aggressor keeps them in the contender conversation, but it can also raise the price of doing business. The move they need might not be the move they want. On paper, the Warriors' wish list sounds simple: a rim-protecting big who can survive in space, or a front-court scorer who forces defenses to stop trapping Curry and loading up on Butler. In reality, those players are rare, expensive, and usually tied to complicated deals that cost you either premium assets, young talent, or both. That's where the painfully obvious part comes in. If the Warriors go big, they risk mortgaging depth and future flexibility. If they go small, a modest upgrade instead of a headline trade, they risk staying in the same crowded middle class of the West, where one bad week can flip you from 6th to 10th. Kuminga's name hangs over everything. Even when the conversation is about a big or another scorer, Most people around the league circle back to the same reality. Kuminga is the cleanest contract lever Golden State has. But that's not just a basketball decision, it's a message. If they trade him for immediate help, they're telling the league they've chosen the present over the long-term project. If they hold him and he remains inconsistent in the rotation, they risk watching a valuable asset become harder to sell. If they increase his role to raise his value, they're making a short-term gamble with the rotation and the nightly urgency to win. Whatever path they take will shape how the rest of the season feels, because the Warriors can't afford a deadline outcome that's merely fine. Not with Curry's timeline, not with the West as tight as it is, and not with the play-in staring at them every morning in the standings. Injuries make the deadline even louder. There's another layer to this. Golden State's older core isn't just dealing with fatigue, they're dealing with real wear and tear. When your most important pieces are veteran stars, the roster can't just be good enough. It has to be sturdy. That's why a rim-protecting center isn't only about matchups. It's also about survival. It's about reducing the physical load on the rest of the defense, giving the team a margin when legs are heavy, and creating a safety net for nights when the perimeter defense isn't perfect. Those are the kinds of small advantages that separate a team that's dangerous from a team that's simply competitive. The stakes, contention or a slow fade. If the Warriors do land a real difference maker, their ceiling changes fast. Curry and Butler are still the type of duo that can win playoff games by force, not by luck, but by command. Add size, rim pressure, or another reliable scoring option, and Golden State becomes the kind of opponent nobody wants in a 7-game series. But if the deadline passes and nothing substantial changes, the repercussions are immediate. The play-in stops being a temporary inconvenience and starts feeling like the team's true level. The margin for mistakes shrinks, because close losses become standings losses. Every quiet night from the supporting cast gets magnified. And every rumor about trades or internal frustration comes back stronger, because the league will assume the Warriors couldn't fix it, not that they chose not to. That's why Vesini's argument resonates. The Warriors don't have to look like a contender today to be treated like one tomorrow. They just have to remain close enough that one decisive move can flip their identity. Until that deadline passes, until the roster is either upgraded or confirmed as is, Golden State lives in that uncomfortable space where they're too talented to dismiss, but too flawed to trust. And that's exactly why the next month could define not only their season, but the last real championship window of the Curry era.